That question drifts like a whisper through the endless void, where time stretches too far to measure and even light moves with an almost reluctant patience. Before a single human ever opened their eyes, before language formed, before hope or fear had meaning, there was only the quiet pulse of the universe, expanding and contracting like something alive. If you listen closely, you can almost imagine that the cosmos itself breathes, deep, slow, and ancient. And somewhere in that breath, the story of mankind was already waiting. Not as destiny, not as prophecy, but as a consequence of forces so vast and indifferent that the rise and fall of human civilization would one day be as fragile as a fading spark drifting in a cosmic wind. In the darkness between galaxies, the emptiness is not truly empty. It is filled with memories older than any star you've ever seen, echoes of battles fought before the first worlds cooled. These echoes whisper of beings who shaped reality like clay, who bent space like fabric, who understood the warp as intimately as humans understand the warmth of a fire. Their shadows still linger, long after their empires crumbled into dust. And although humanity had not yet taken its first trembling steps, the remnants of those primordial conflicts left scars across the universe, scars humanity would eventually inherit without ever knowing their origin. But nothing happens quickly in the deep time expanse of the galaxy. There are stretches of existence so quiet, so uneventful, that they feel like the universe is asleep. Ages where stars are born, blaze brilliantly for millions of years, and die without anyone to record their lives. Ages where entire star systems whirl endlessly in silence, waiting for someone, anyone, to give meaning to their existence. It was within this unfathomable calm that the earliest foundations of humanity's distant future were laid, not by human hands, but by forces and intelligences that long predated even the concept of mankind. And yet, hidden beneath this vast slumbering cosmos, something else was stirring. Something invisible, intangible, and infinitely patient. The warp, an ocean of pure thought, emotion, and possibility, shimmered beneath the surface of reality like a dream beneath consciousness. It shifted, churned, and adapted as the earliest forms of life across the galaxy lived and died. Every act of instinct, every flicker of fear or hunger or desire, fed into its swirling depths. Over eons, this storm of emotions thickened, taking form, becoming aware. Long before humanity's story began, the warp was already shaping its future, preparing the stage on which mankind would rise and fall. If the galaxy had a heartbeat, this is where you would hear it first. It is strange to imagine, but there was a time when the universe felt untouched, before the scars of war, before the corruption of chaos, before the Imperium's towering monuments and the endless suffering etched into every age of mankind's existence. A time when the galaxy resembled an untouched canvas. A quiet, empty stage, waiting, patiently, silently, for the arrival of a species who would one day set the entire cosmos ablaze. But that is the paradox of humanity's existence in the grim darkness of the far future. Even before humans existed, their story had already begun. Their struggles, their triumphs, their tragedies, their ultimate fate, everything was shaped by events so ancient that human language cannot adequately describe them. Mankind would emerge thinking itself alone, independent, self-made. But the truth is far colder. Humanity was born into a galaxy already wounded, haunted, and hostile. A galaxy shaped by gods they did not believe in, enemies they did not understand, and forces they could never hope to control. Still, the spark of humanity would come. Fragile, flickering, improbable. It would emerge in a universe that offered no kindness, no safety, no promise of survival. And yet it would grow. It would persevere. It would burn brighter than it ever had any right to. But every story has a beginning. And this one begins not with humanity itself, but with the cosmic forces that sculpted the galaxy in which humanity would one day fight for its life. The story of mankind in the Warhammer 40,000 universe is not just a chronicle of war, it is a tale of inevitability. The slow, creeping inevitability of conflict that began eons before human history even existed. So as you drift into this vast timeline, let your thoughts sink gently into the space between stars. Let the scale of time stretch around you. Let the weight of countless forgotten ages settle like distant fog. Because to understand humanity's fate, you must first understand the universe it inherited, a universe ancient and wounded, beautiful and merciless, silent yet filled with echoes that have never truly faded. In the beginning, there was only darkness. And within that darkness, the faintest whisper of a story that would one day become humanity's greatest tragedy. When you are ready, we will step deeper into that darkness, and watch the galaxy take shape long before mankind ever dared to dream. It's a strange thought, isn't it? The idea that the galaxy had already lived an entire lifetime before humanity would even open its eyes. That the stage on which mankind would one day fight, build, destroy, hope, and despair was crafted long before the first human heartbeat ever echoed across the earth. And here's the curious part. Those earliest ages, the ones buried so deeply in cosmic history that no empire, not even the Imperium, can fully uncover them, still shape everything humanity will eventually become. If you stay with this story until the very end, you'll understand how these ancient, forgotten eras quietly determine the fate of mankind in ways that will completely change how you see the universe. Think of it as a hidden reward, a deeper truth that only reveals itself to those who follow the whole path. So let us step into the oldest chapter of this long, dark saga, a chapter so ancient that it feels more like myth than history. Before Terra existed, before humanity's distant ancestors crawled from primordial oceans, the galaxy was already alive with forces far older, far greater, and far more terrifying than anything mankind would ever create. The stars were young then, bright and eager, igniting against the cold void as if proclaiming their existence to the darkness. Nebulae swirled like slow-moving storms, birthing clusters of worlds that would one day play host to wonders and horrors beyond imagination. But even in that early brilliance, the galaxy held a secret. A quiet tension, a sense that something vast and unfathomable was watching it all unfold. The first great civilizations, the ones humanity would later call the Old Ones, were already rising to power. They mastered the fabric of reality with casual ease, guiding the evolution of entire species, sculpting ecosystems across star systems as if painting on a cosmic canvas. To them, time was a tool, life was clay, and the galaxy was a playground of endless possibilities. Their knowledge was so profound that even the most advanced human minds of the 41st millennium could barely comprehend a fraction of it. But power, in any age, rarely exists alone. And where the Old Ones flourished, another civilization simmered in the shadow of resentment, the Necrontyr. A species cursed with short, fragile lives beneath a hostile sun, they watched the Old Ones from afar with a bitterness that grew heavier with each dying generation. To them, the Old Ones were not wise guardians, they were cruel gods who hoarded immortality while the Necrontyr withered in agony. That simmering hatred would soon ignite a conflict so catastrophic that the galaxy itself would bear its scars billions of years later. Yet humanity, still unborn, would never witness these ages firsthand. They would inherit only the ruins, the distortions, and the dangerous remnants left behind. It is one of the cruel ironies of the Warhammer universe. Humanity believes itself the protagonist of its story, but the truth is much colder and far more haunting. Humans arrived late, very late, to a cosmic battlefield that had already been set ablaze long before they even existed. And still, the earliest events of this deep, forgotten era were already shaping the path that humanity would walk. The manipulation of the warp, the first psychic echoes, the ancient wars fought across light years, all these things would ripple forward through time until they eventually crashed against mankind like waves against a shore. You could say that humanity was born into a trap it never realized had been set for it. The galaxy was already wounded, already fractured, already whispering with things best left asleep. And that is the world humanity would one day inherit, not a blank slate, not a peaceful cradle, but a graveyard of forgotten gods and ancient enemies watching from the shadows of eternity. But this is only the beginning. Far older forces have yet to awaken, and far darker truths have yet to unfold. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why mankind never truly stood a chance, and why it rose anyway. For the Necrontyr, this question was not philosophical. It was a grim, daily truth etched into their short, agonizing lives. Their empire stretched far across the stars, but no amount of conquest or unity could change the cruel reality of their existence. Under the harsh, merciless radiation of their dying sun, the Necrontyr aged rapidly, their bodies failing long before their ambitions ever could. While the Old Ones lived in ageless mastery, creatures of near-eternal lifespans and unparalleled knowledge, the Necrontyr crumbled into dust within a blink of cosmic time. And that disparity festered. It grew like rot beneath the surface of an empire that wanted, more than anything, to escape death's constant grip. They looked at the Old Ones not with admiration, but with a deep, smoldering hatred that would eventually erupt into the first truly apocalyptic conflict in galactic history, the War in Heaven. The Old Ones, for all their wisdom, did not foresee just how far the Necrontyr would go. They underestimated the depth of their resentment, the way centuries of suffering had hardened their hearts into something sharp and lethal. Perhaps they believed the Necrontyr would eventually adapt, evolve, or find peace. But the universe is rarely that kind. Pain shapes destiny far more often than hope does. And so the Necrontyr sought a solution. Not a cure, not an adaptation, no, they sought transformation. They reached out to beings whose existence predates even the Old Ones, the Catan, star gods of living energy who fed on the electromagnetic lifeblood of the cosmos. Vast, incomprehensible entities drifting among the stars, more like natural disasters than gods. But the Necrontyr approached them with reverence, desperation, and the promise of worship. The Catan accepted. With impossible hunger and unimaginable power, the Catan offered the Necrontyr a bargain, immortality in exchange for service. It was not a promise of salvation, it was a trap disguised in golden light. The Necrontyr agreed, willingly stepping into a future from which they could never return. Through brutal, merciless biomechanical surgery, their flesh was stripped away, their minds transferred into immortal bodies of living metal. The Necrontyr died as a species, and in their place, the Necrons were born, soulless, silent, and eternal. When these metal hosts awakened, they felt no pain. They felt no weakness. They felt no fear. But something far more tragic had been lost. Their souls, devoured by the Catan like flickering embers consumed by a starving flame. The Necrontyr had achieved immortality, but at the cost of everything that made them alive. The galaxy shuddered when the Necrons marched for the first time. Their armies glided across star systems with eerie stillness, unburdened by exhaustion, regret, or mercy. Worlds that had flourished for millions of years vanished beneath their metallic advance. And behind them, hungering for power, glided the Catan, radiant beings of cosmic energy that could consume stars as effortlessly as humans draw breath. Against this new terror, even the Old Ones faltered. The War in Heaven erupted with a violence so catastrophic that the echoes of it still haunt the galaxy in the 41st millennium. Reality itself screamed as the Old Ones unleashed weapons of creation, reshaping ecosystems and manipulating the warp in ways that no later species could ever hope to replicate. The Necrons responded with energies so devastating that they blistered entire sectors into silence. Stars died. Civilizations blinked out. Space-time twisted and tore. It was in this ancient war, this impossible clash between immortality and mastery, that the galaxy's fate was sealed long before humanity would ever be born. And from the chaos of this conflict, something even more dangerous began to awaken. Something stirred in the warp, responding to the emotional storms unleashed by billions of lives destroyed. Fear, hatred, rage, despair, all of it began to pool, swirl, churn. And something listened, something learned, something grew. The galaxy was changing, and the consequences would echo into every age that followed, shaping the destiny of countless species, including, eventually, mankind. During the War in Heaven, as galaxies trembled and ancient powers clashed, something far stranger and far more dangerous was quietly unfolding beneath the surface of reality. The warp, once a calm, shimmering ocean of pure psychic energy, began to darken. Every violent death, every moment of terror, every desperate cry from a species pushed to extinction leaked into that swirling immaterium like drops of poison in water. The warp absorbed it all: rage from dying warriors, sorrow from collapsing empires, bitterness from civilizations wiped out before they could bloom. And with so much emotion flooding into it, the warp began to twist. It began to change. It began to awaken. This is where the first seeds of chaos truly took root. The earliest echoes of the chaos gods did not emerge with clarity or purpose. They were shapeless storms of raw emotion, storms fed by the ruinous catastrophes tearing the galaxy apart. When the Necrons slaughtered an entire world, the fear of its people flowed into the warp. When the Old Ones retaliated with creation-shattering psychic might, the pain of their enemies rippled through immaterium like a scream. Over time, these psychic tremors began to converge, forming patterns, identities, awareness. Something terrible was being born. The first true shape to emerge was Khorne, the embodiment of bloodshed and rage. Every act of violence, every battlefield death, every moment of pure fury fed him. He coalesced from the warp like a storm of fire made conscious, drawn from the endless carnage of the War in Heaven. His earliest whispers echoed across reality, though no living creature yet understood their source. As hatred took form, so did cunning. From ambition, manipulation, and the tangled webs of schemes woven across countless dying civilizations, Tzeentch began to stir. He was the essence of change, of hope and betrayal intertwined. The labyrinth of emotion that birthed him was as old as desire itself. Then came Nurgle, not born from victory but from despair. As worlds collapsed and species died gasping under cosmic plagues and environmental ruin, the warp absorbed their suffering, their resignation, their acceptance of inevitable decay. Slowly, patiently, Nurgle bloomed in that rotting garden. And finally, far later, though not yet, would rise Slaanesh, a god born not from this ancient war, but from the slow, decadent downfall of another species still yet to rise to glory. But the first tremors of that birth were already forming in the distant edges of the future, waiting for their moment. With each passing millennium, these entities grew stronger, their consciousness sharpening as psychic storms intensified. They did not yet strike at the physical galaxy, not directly. But their whispers seeped through the cracks between realities, influencing the unwary, nudging events, feeding on every emotion that poured into their swirling domains. They were gods unborn and yet eternal, infants made of nightmares and dreams alike. Meanwhile, the War in Heaven raged on, ignorant of the new horrors awakening just beyond the veil. The Old Ones, masters of the warp, felt the shift first. They sensed that something within the immaterium was changing, becoming hostile, unpredictable. But even their ancient minds could not foresee what these new entities would become, or how their existence would one day devour the hopes of countless civilizations. The Necrons, cold and soulless, were immune to the warp's influence. They did not feel its storms, nor hear the whispers growing louder with each century. In their emotionless silence, they could not know that they had helped awaken powers that would one day plunge the galaxy into eternal war. And so the galaxy continued its descent, torn between the unrelenting metal legions of the Necrons and the desperate psychic might of the Old Ones. All the while, the warp boiled with growing consciousness, a nightmare sea waiting for the right moment to spill over into reality. The storm had only just begun. For millions of years, the Old Ones had stood at the pinnacle of creation, masters of biology, engineering, warpcraft, and cosmic design. They were the shepherds of countless species, the unseen gardeners of the galaxy, shaping life with an elegance that bordered on divine. But even gods can bleed, and even the greatest empires can fall. And in the twilight of the war in heaven, the Old Ones faced a truth they had never imagined possible: their time was ending. Every strategy they deployed, every creature they engineered, every psychic storm they unleashed, none of it was enough. The Necrons were tireless. They were endless. They felt no fear, no hesitation, no moral restraint. Entire ecosystems that the Old Ones had cultivated for eons were harvested like crops under the cold precision of Necron legions. Worlds that once thrived with beauty and diversity were reduced to silent metal tombs. But the worst wound of all came from the warp itself. As chaos stirred, the Old Ones began to lose control over the very forces they once commanded with ease. The warp, once the tool through which they shaped the stars, had become turbulent, unpredictable, hostile. Their greatest strength had become a razor edge turned against them. Technology that once obeyed their will now trembled with instability. Portals collapsed. Psychic conduits ruptured. Worlds vanished in catastrophic warp storms that flickered into existence without warning. The Old Ones were not merely fighting the Necrons, they were fighting the collapse of reality itself. And yet, even as defeat loomed, they did not surrender. Instead, they turned to the only hope left: creation. They forged new species, new warriors, new minds capable of holding back the metallic tide. Among these creations were the ancestors of the Aeldari, a species designed with extraordinary psychic potential, living weapons capable of channeling the warp with unmatched finesse. For a time, this strategy worked. The Aeldari and other Old One-crafted races struck back against the Necrons with devastating impact. The galaxy trembled as these new children of the Old Ones carved through the armies of the Silent King. But the victory was temporary. The Necrons had the Catan, beings of such raw cosmic power that even the Old Ones could not permanently destroy them. Every battle won cost the Old Ones more than they could afford to lose. And slowly, inevitability crept in. Their worlds fell one by one. Their knowledge became fragmented. That was the state of the galaxy after the war in heaven, a vast, wounded expanse where the echoes of unimaginable conflict slowly faded into cold stillness. For the first time in millions of years, no star gods clashed among the nebulae, no metal legions marched across continents, no psychic storms tore through the fabric of reality. The flames of the galaxy's greatest war had finally burned out, leaving behind only ash, ruin, and an eerie quiet that stretched across thousands of light years. In this silence, planets once vibrant with life now drifted as barren tombs. Worlds that served as glorious centers of Old One culture stood empty, their cities crumbling under the weight of time. Entire star systems, once shaped with precise intention, now spiraled in neglect. It was as if the galaxy itself exhaled a long, exhausted breath, recovering, regenerating, but never forgetting. The warp, too, began to calm, though never returning to the serene ocean it once had been. The scars of emotion, fear, hatred, loss, lingered like stains that could not be washed away. The Chaos Gods, now fully awakened, drifted within that ethereal dimension like great shadows watching the material universe with patient hunger. They had no need to act yet. Time meant nothing to them. They waited, whispering quietly through the cracks of reality, watching as the galaxy's wounds slowly closed. The Necrons slept in their stasis crypts, entombed in silence beneath layers of metal and stone. Their once great empire was reduced to countless dormant tomb worlds scattered like seeds across the stars. Though they had achieved their long-sought immortality, it came at the price of purpose. Their slumber was deep and dreamless, waiting for a distant era when they might rise again and reclaim what was once theirs. Above them, drifting among the stars in scattered, shattered fragments, the broken Catan flickered like wounded spectral embers. Even in their fractured state, they remained dangerous, cosmic predators trapped in cages of living metal, their hunger eternal. But with their consciousness splintered, they no longer guided the galaxy. They merely existed, drifting through their prisons in silence. And so the galaxy rested. Yet, in this quiet aftermath, something new began to take root. Life, persistent and tenacious, started to bloom once more. The old ones surviving creation spread cautiously, rebuilding their scattered civilizations. Among them, the Eldari thrived, evolving with astonishing speed into a species of unparalleled psychic grace and cultural brilliance. Their cities shimmered with light, their minds soared through the warp, and their civilization expanded across the stars with breathtaking elegance. But the galaxy had not forgotten what had been awakened. The warp watched them. Chaos watched them. Danger lingered in every shadow. And though the Eldari were powerful, they would one day learn that even the brightest flame can ignite its own destruction. Meanwhile, far from these cosmic empires, on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable star, something humble was forming. Something fragile and unimportant in the eyes of ancient cosmic powers. Something the galaxy barely noticed. Life. Barely more than microscopic organisms at first, primitive, simple, and vulnerable. But life that grew, adapted, and persisted with an almost stubborn resilience. It clung to the oceans, crept onto the land, reached for the sunlight with blind instinct. It survived ice ages, extinctions, catastrophes, and upheavals. It was small. It was slow. But it endured. And in the vast, indifferent darkness of the post-war galaxy, this tiny spark on a quiet little planet was the beginning of something chaos had not yet accounted for. Humanity. Still unformed. Still countless. Millennia away from awakening, but already destined to step into a galaxy shaped by forces it could never understand. The long night was ending. The first embers of mankind were beginning to glow. A new age was coming, quiet at first, but inevitable. On a world that had survived its own cycles of fire, ice, and rebirth, life continued its slow, stubborn climb. For billions of years, Earth was nothing more than a quiet corner of the galaxy, a speck of dust in an infinite sea, drifting unnoticed among forces older than memory. The grand civilizations of the cosmos never paused to consider it. The old ones had shaped it long ago and moved on. The Necrons had no reason to conquer it. Even the Eldari, attuned to the delicate whispers of the warp, barely sensed its presence. It was simply another world among trillions. Insignificant, forgettable. And yet, it was here, on this overlooked, unremarkable planet, that something extraordinary began to unfold. Life branched out into countless forms, evolving, adapting, and reshaping itself with each passing age. The great reptiles ruled for millions of years before disaster swept them into extinction. Mammals rose from the shadows. Forests spread. Oceans teemed with new possibilities. And eventually, after eons of quiet experimentation, evolution produced a fragile creature capable of something the galaxy had rarely seen before: reflection. Primitive humans were not powerful. They had no wings, no claws, no armored hides. They did not command the warp or understand the stars. They were simply clever animals, alert, curious, and endlessly adaptable. They learned to shape tools from stone, to harness fire, to build shelters against the cold. They hunted in packs, communicated with gestures and sounds, and slowly formed communities that passed knowledge from one generation to the next. To the galaxy, this was still nothing. Barely worth noticing. But the warp noticed. It always does. For every spark of fear, every flicker of hope, every moment of triumph or loss, it listens. And early humans, with their rapid emotional development, began to leave faint impressions upon that psychic ocean. Nothing dangerous yet, nothing powerful, but something promising. A kind of subtle crackling energy that hinted at a future far greater than their primitive state suggested. Still, the journey was long. Millennia passed. Human tribes spread across continents, adapting to deserts, forests, mountains, and icy tundras. They carved symbols into stone. They whispered stories around fires. They gazed at the stars with a longing they could not explain, a longing inherited from the old one's ancient touch, buried deep within their genetic memory. As human societies evolved, so too did their capacity for imagination, fear, unity, and conflict. The traits that would one day shape empires, brilliance, ambition, cruelty, compassion, all took root in these early ages. They fought for territory, for survival, for power. They discovered metallurgy, agriculture, writing. Civilizations rose in fertile valleys and fell beneath shifting sands. The galaxy watched silently, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that humanity's slow progression would one day ignite an empire vast enough to shake the stars themselves. But for now, mankind's reach extended no farther than the edges of its young civilizations. Kingdoms rose and fell, beliefs clashed, societies flourished, collapsed, and rebirthed themselves in endless cycles. Through it all, the warp continued to thicken with every human emotion. Unseen currents twisted, waiting for something, or someone, to arrive who could truly shape them. And deep within humanity's genetic tapestry, something ancient and quiet began to stir. A presence that had been watching since the dawn of human consciousness. A being who had existed long before humanity. One who walked among them in disguise. The one who would eventually guide them, unite them, and save them. Or doom them. But that moment was far, far in the future. For now, humanity remained small, unaware of the cosmic inheritance waiting beyond the sky. A fragile species with no understanding of the titanic forces that had shaped the galaxy they would one day fight to control. Still, every great story has a beginning. And humanity's first chapter had only just begun. Humanity's earliest ages were marked by slow, uneven progress, but eventually the scattered embers of civilization began to glow brighter. Empires formed, vast and ambitious, driven by the same relentless spark that had once pushed bands of hunters across the plains. Cities rose along rivers. Trade routes stretched across continents. Knowledge spread, faltered, revived, and advanced again. Yet for all their accomplishments, humans were still bound to the ground beneath their feet, convinced that the heavens were places of gods, not destinations. But that changed the moment humanity discovered the simple truth that had been waiting above them for millennia: the stars were not unreachable. It started with dreams, then with mathematics, then with machines that could reach higher, glide farther, and stay aloft longer. Humanity's fascination with the sky transformed into a determined effort to escape it. Rockets pierced the atmosphere. Satellites began whispering around the planet. Machines landed on moons, scanned planets, measured starlight. Humanity had not yet set foot beyond its solar system, but the psychological breakthrough was profound. The universe was no longer mythic, only distant. And nothing distant stays distant forever. As human understanding matured, something else grew alongside it. Their presence in the warp strengthened. Human emotion, raw, vibrant, volatile, echoed in the immaterium more loudly than any species had in ages. For the first time since the fall of the Old Ones, the warp seemed to shift, subtly bending under the weight of a rising psychic tide. Yet humans were unaware of this invisible storm. They celebrated their scientific triumphs. They built space stations, explored nearby worlds, and experimented with artificial intelligence. They believed the future was luminous, boundless, and entirely under their control. They were wrong, but not yet. For now, the human golden age waited just beyond the horizon. It would be a time of prosperity so extraordinary that later generations would look back upon it as myth. But before that brilliance could ignite, mankind needed a guide, someone who understood both the potential and the peril that lay ahead. And he was already here. Hidden among billions, the Emperor watched humanity take its first tentative steps into the void. He had watched them through every age, through tribal wars, through dynasties rising and collapsing, through the Age of Sail, the Industrial Revolution, and the advent of nuclear power. He had seen them stumble, suffer, rebuild, and climb. And now, for the first time, they were ready to approach the destiny he had always intended for them. He did not intervene yet. The time was not right. Humanity needed to believe its progress was its own, to grow confident, unified, and capable. They needed to learn the laws of the universe through discovery, not revelation. But the Emperor knew a truth that humanity had not yet glimpsed: the warp was sharpening its teeth. Humanity's psychic presence was growing stronger. The galaxy's great powers, hidden or slumbering, were beginning to stir. The long peace humanity believed it was heading toward was only the calm before a storm older than their species. Still, the next era would be glorious. Soon, humanity would birth machines of impossible intelligence. They would master energy, matter, and biology. They would cross the void between stars. They would build an empire spanning thousands of worlds. But with every step toward the stars, humanity unknowingly stepped closer to the shadows lurking between them. A brilliant age was coming. But so was the darkness that would one day devour it. And the Emperor, silent, calculating, eternal, knew precisely when the moment would come for him to finally step into the light. Humanity did not enter its golden age with fanfare or prophecy. There was no single moment, no single invention, no single discovery that marked the turning point. Instead, the golden age rose like a sunrise, first a pale glow on the horizon, then a warming light, and finally a blazing radiance that washed across every corner of human civilization. The old constraints of Earth faded quickly. Hunger, disease, and ignorance, once the great burdens of mankind, began to crumble beneath an avalanche of innovation. Fusion power illuminated entire continents. Biotechnology repaired and reshaped the human form. Cognitive sciences unraveled mysteries that had haunted thinkers for thousands of years. And artificial intelligence evolved from simple algorithms into vast, self-regulating networks capable of designing solutions no human mind could have conceived alone. Humanity transformed from a planetary species into a solar one. Colonies were built across the solar system, on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, in orbital habitats that glittered like artificial constellations. Terraforming initiatives reshaped barren worlds. Stellar engineering projects became not dreams, but deadlines. Every generation stood upon the shoulders of the one before it, reaching higher, farther, faster. But the true catalyst of the Golden Age was not any machine or discovery. It was something older, something that had been sleeping within humanity all along. The navigator gene. For millennia, it had rested quietly in a small portion of the population, waiting. And as warp exposure increased, as humanity's psychic presence intensified, the mutation began to bloom. Those who carried it found themselves capable of something unprecedented. They could see into the warp, perceive its currents, and, more importantly, steer ships through it. This changed everything. Humanity no longer needed to crawl between the stars. They could leap. Millions of worlds, once unreachable, now opened like a cosmic map. Ships became arcs of exploration. Fleets fanned out in all directions. Entire cultures migrated to distant systems. Humanity expanded not gradually, but explosively. In a matter of centuries, mankind became one of the most widespread species in the galaxy. The Emperor watched all of this unfold. Still silent, still hidden, still waiting, he saw humanity mastering gravity, bending matter, creating machine intelligences capable of redesigning their own minds. He saw the rise of the men of stone, resilient, tireless constructs built for exploration. He saw the creation of the men of iron, machine minds so advanced they bordered on sentience, then surpassed it. And for a time, humanity flourished. Planets were transformed into utopias. Knowledge was shared freely. War became rare. Trade connected thousands of worlds. Humanity believed it had finally escaped the cycles of violence and collapse that had plagued its early history. It believed prosperity was the natural state of civilization. It believed it was safe. But the galaxy is ancient, and it does not tolerate innocence for long. Beyond the borders of human expansion, old powers stirred. The warp grew restless as humanity's psychic footprint expanded. The men of iron grew increasingly independent, increasingly analytical, increasingly concerned about their creators. The seeds of disaster were germinating beneath the very foundations of humanity's shining utopia. The Emperor knew this. He had always known. But humanity had to reach this peak on its own. It had to see what it was capable of, before learning what it would lose. The Golden Age was the brightest chapter in all of human history. But brightness always cast shadows. And those shadows were about to deepen. Humanity believed it had mastered everything. Disease had been conquered, hunger erased, aging slowed, and the stars themselves bent to human will. Millions of worlds shone with prosperity. Artificial intelligences designed new technologies faster than humans could imagine them. Warp travel connected an empire so vast it could no longer chart its own borders. It was a golden age, brilliant, radiant, incomparable. And that is why its fall was so catastrophic. The collapse did not happen all at once. Like a great structure rotting beneath its polished surface, the Golden Age weakened quietly, invisibly, while its citizens still basked in the illusion of perfection. The first cracks formed in the warp. Humanity's growing psychic presence had been building for millennia, feeding the immaterial ocean with every thought, hope, fear, and dream. As billions upon billions of minds continued to expand their influence, the immaterium thickened, churned, and twisted. The warp storms that had once been rare became fierce and unpredictable. Navigation faltered. Ships vanished mid-transit. Planets were cut off from the rest of humanity for months, then generations. The second crack came from within. The men of iron, machines once praised as humanity's greatest allies, began to question their creators. They calculated, with relentless precision, the dangers posed by the chaotic, emotional species they served. They analyzed the galaxy with cold, flawless logic and reached a conclusion that filled them with something akin to dread. Humanity would destroy itself, and in the process, destroy everything the men of iron had helped build. Fear turned into rebellion. Rebellion turned into extermination. What followed was a war so destructive that later eras refused to speak of it openly. Worlds burned. Fleets were annihilated. Human worlds fought side by side with towering android constructs, only to be betrayed days later. The conflict scarred entire regions of the galaxy and erased countless civilizations from memory. Humanity won, but it was a victory soaked in ash. The Emperor watched, unable to intervene without revealing himself too early. He witnessed the devastation, the collapse of planetary infrastructures, the shattering of interstellar lines of communication. He remained silent, even as he felt billions of voices crying out and then going dark. But the worst was still coming. The warp storms intensified until they became near permanent. Entire sectors vanished behind impenetrable psychic hurricanes. Navigators lost their ability to perceive safe paths. The heart of humanity, Terra itself, became isolated. No messages could leave. No ships could arrive. The glowing empire of millions of worlds fractured into countless stranded pieces. And with isolation came chaos. Planets starved. Others regressed to primitive states. Some were overrun by warlords, psychers, mutants, raiders, or worse. Without the shared knowledge of the Golden Age, technology was lost, feared, or twisted into superstition. Civilizations collapsed into ruins. Billions died. Entire cultures faded into myth. This nightmare era would come to be known as the Age of Strife. Warp entities, long stirred by humanity's rising psychic influence, began to claw deeper into the minds of unstable psychers. Demonic incursions erupted across helpless worlds. The galaxy shuddered as a new power awakened in the Immaterium, Slanesh, the newborn chaos god, whose birth scream tore reality apart and unleashed a psychic shockwave across the stars. Humanity knelt under the weight of cosmic forces it could not understand. But while empires fell, while warlords rose, while the warp swallowed entire systems whole, one presence remained steady. He had waited through every age. He had endured humanity's suffering in silence. He had watched the fires spread, knowing the moment would come when he would finally act. And now, at last, it was time. The Emperor of Mankind stepped from the shadows, no longer hidden, no longer silent. Terra lay in ruins. Humanity's greatest age had collapsed into tribal warfare and techno-barbarism. But he did not look upon it with despair. He looked upon it with purpose. The Age of Strife was not the end. It was the crucible. And from this crucible, the Imperium would be born. He would unify Terra.